All right, let's break down the latest earnings report from the pharmaceutical giant Dr. Reddy's.
So you see this big number flash up, 8,805 crore rupees. That's Dr. Reddy's total revenue for the quarter. But what's the real story behind a number like that? Okay, let's dive in.
To really get the big picture, you've got to start with the core financial results. This is kind of the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. And what this table shows us is a story of really steady growth. I mean, revenue's up almost 10% from last year. But check out that bottom number, profit after tax up a whopping 14%. And that tells you something crucial. They're not just selling more stuff, they're actually getting more profitable.
So the big question is, how'd they do it? Well, numbers like these don't just happen by accident. It all comes down to a few really specific, deliberate moves they made that really fueled this growth.
For starters, they looked outward. They really focused on growing their presence in key international markets. You can't just rely on one region. You have to diversify your game. And they did this in a really smart way by buying established brands like Stugeron. This is a classic move, right? Buying a brand that people already know gives you an instant foothold in new places without having to build everything from scratch. But hey, they didn't forget about their own backyard. At the exact same time, they were innovating and bringing some critical new treatments right to the Indian market. They rolled out 2 brand new drugs for some pretty common but often really debilitating gut health issues. This shows they're really tuned in to what patients need right there at home. But their strategy wasn't just about sales figures and commercial growth. They also made moves that show they're committed to making a bigger impact on global health. And this is really interesting. They've partnered up with some major health organizations to make a vital HIV prevention tool more accessible. So this is about way more than just profit. It's about using their power to make a real difference in developing countries. All right, so let's take a quick trip around the world now and see how all these strategies actually played out on the ground, because trust me, the story is not the same everywhere. This chart gives us a fantastic snapshot. North America is the biggest single piece of the pie at 41%. But what's really important here is that India, Europe, and the other emerging markets, they make up the majority of the business when you add them all up. This isn't a company that's just dependent on one market. Its strength is truly global. This was the revenue from North America. And yeah, it's their largest market, but as you're about to see, that top line number is hiding a pretty complicated story. Turns out the US market was actually pretty tough this quarter. The whole US generics market was basically flat, but Dr. Reddy's actually slipped a little bit, coming in just behind the market average. So, you gotta ask, why? Well, it boils down to 2 main things. First, something the industry calls price erosion, which is just a fancy way of saying fierce competition is driving prices down for everybody. And second, they saw lower sales for one of their major products. It's a perfect example of just how tough that market can be. Okay, now let's hop over to Europe, because the story there, it's the complete opposite. It was the absolute standout this quarter. And when I say standout, I really mean it. Just look at this. We're talking explosive growth. Revenue in Europe more than doubled, soaring an incredible 138% from last year. A jump like that is just massive. So what lit the fuse on this rocket ship? It was mostly driven by a huge new business acquisition, their nicotine replacement therapy business. It just goes to show how one smart purchase can completely change the game for an entire region. And circling back home to India, this is a story of real strength. You can see they didn't just grow, they actually grew faster than the entire Indian pharma market. This is a huge sign that their strategy of launching new drugs, like those 2 we talked about earlier, is really paying off and helping them win more market share on their home turf. All right, so that's the story of the last quarter. A bit of a mixed bag, but overall pretty solid. So the question is, what's the game plan now? Where do they go from here? Well, they've laid out a super clear 6-point strategy. It's a really balanced approach, right? Double down on what's already working, keep an eye out for smart companies to buy, push new products forward, and through it all, just run a tighter, more efficient and compliant ship. Which really brings us to the final and most important question. They've got the plan. It's solid. But can that plan overcome those intense pricing pressures we saw in the US and consistently turn all these ambitious ideas into actual profit? Well, that's going to be the story to watch.